to the Glam Metal Interview Series, presented by RockMusicStar.com, with host Thomas S. Orwat Jr.
Hey everyone, it's Thomas from GlamMetal.com with episode number 16 of the Glam Metal Interview Series. It is February 9th, 2021, and we have Cowboy Mach Bell returning for another visit. As you remember, Cowboy Mach Bell was a member of the Joe Perry Project from 1982 to 1984. We featured him in the Glam Metal Interview Series number 13. Cowboy Mach returns for a follow-up interview with us in which we discuss every track of the 1983 Joe Perry Project, Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker. So get ready, this is a great interview. And here he is, Cowboy Mach Bell. Hey Glam Metalheads, welcome back to the Glam Metal Interview Series. And look who we have back for round 2. Cowboy Mach Bell has been kind enough to return for a part 2 interview with us. Episode number 13 was devoted to Mach and his Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, the diary book that he put out in 2019. And today what we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on the record Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker by the Joe Perry Project, which was released in September of 1983. Mach, how are you doing today?
Doing great. We had a nice snowfall up here in Massachusetts today, and you know we love the snow up here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, with me being in Buffalo, same thing here. I've been snow blowing my driveway every day. It's winter's definitely here, and it's a good time to like sit back, drink something warm, and listen to the Joe Perry Project.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we are going to really dig down deep and look at the 1983 Joe Perry Project release, Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker. But before we start that, I want to give some people who are watching this for the very first time who did not get to see episode number 13. I just want to give them a little summary of what transpired and how you ended up working with Joe Perry. So basically what happened was in 1979, Joe Perry had left Aerosmith right in the middle of recording Night in the Ruts record. And then he in 1980, he released his first solo record called Let the Music Do the Talking. And that featured Ralph Morman as the vocalist. And then in 1981, Joe Perry Project released another record, and that was called I've Got the Rock and Rolls Again, and that featured Charlie Farron on vocals. And then Joe Perry decided to revamp the project, and he recruited you, Cowboy Mach Bell, who was in you had some. You were pretty famous out there in the Boston area with your band Thunder Train prior to the Joe Perry Project. So that's probably how he heard of you. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Joe's manager, the new manager, Tim Collins, had worked with Thunder Train, and Earthquake Morton, who was also working out of that office. They were very familiar with me. Joe, I'm not sure how familiar he was with anything outside of Aerosmith, but he might have heard of me.
Yeah. Well, I know that Joe was he was really into good rock and roll. So I'm sure that if he heard the Thunder Train CD or record, I should say, back at that time, I'm sure that probably led to his decision to say, hey, let's try this guy out. And when you originally joined the Joe Perry Project, or actually you tried out for the Joe Perry Project, Brad Whitford from Aerosmith was also in the Joe Perry Project at the same time. How intimidating was that going up there, not just seeing Joe Perry, but also Brad Whitford?
Extremely intimidating. Yeah, it was Brad's first day in the Joe Perry Project as well on the day that I auditioned. I showed up to the audition and I heard, I could hear Joe from a mile away. And then I heard the second guitar, and then I kind of freaked because I'd been asked to bring a guitar with me to the audition. Charlie, the singer before me, was a guitar playing lead singer. So I show up and I was under the impression that I was going to be jamming with Joe, and it wasn't going to be one of these 10 guys lined up audition things. Anyway, I heard the second guitar. I said, oh no, he's got another guy in there, and he sounds really good on the guitar. And I'd kind of gone over the chords a little bit, but I was spending a lot more time on the vocal because I was between you and me, I was hoping that if he hired me, that I wouldn't be going in as a guitar playing singer. That's not the kind of singer I am so much.
Right. And that's the prior singer, Charlie Farron. He was like he did play guitar with Joe in the Joe Perry project.
Yeah, and it worked fantastic.
Right.
And Charlie came in with a bunch of tunes that they'd already been doing in town with his band previous to Joe. So he's like a one-man band, Charlie Farron.
Yeah.
And so it worked really well for Joe. The only problem was Charlie was one-man band, so it was really easy for him to say, "Thanks, Joe. I'm going to leave now and go get my own record deal."
Right. And he ended up forming a band called Fahrenheit.
That's right.
I'm not sure if that was right afterwards, but like down the road it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple bands down the road, and yeah, and they did really well and toured the arenas. They didn't have stratospheric hit, but they and Charlie's still out there opening for big bands, REO, Cheap Trick, all that. Usually just solo though. With him and his guitar, it's great.
So when Joe formed, well, let's get back to Brad Whitford, who was formerly of Aerosmith at the time, jamming with the Joe Perry project. He didn't last in the band very long, and you allude to this, of course, in your book, Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker Diary. For the people that haven't read the book, can you just like shed some light on why Brad didn't remain with the Joe Perry project?
Well, because he got an offer that paid money out in LA from Rex Smith, the brother of the singer in Stars. Rex was the host then of Solid Gold, a TV dance pop show. But Rex had put out his own albums too, and he's a good rock frontman, actually. Brad got called to go out and do that, and apparently they were going to pay him money. And money was always a problem in the project. We didn't have much, and when it did come in, Joe had a lot of obligations financially at that point because he was drowning in debt and had an expensive wife, a soon-to-be ex-wife. He just had his first child. He had the project to keep on the road, which is expensive. Even if you're doing it out of a van and in the Motel 6, like we were a lot of the time, it's still expensive to keep 8-10 guys out on the road, back and forth across the country.
Yeah.
So it was a money pit, and there just wasn't enough extra around, I think, for Brad to really, be able to pay the mortgage on his expensive. Both Joe and Brad at that point both had their expensive mansions from the 70s Aerosmith explosion. Those things were soon to go away, but they were still trying to support that lifestyle as best they could.
So once the band came about, you what was the lineup of the Joe Perry project when you played your very first gig with the Joe Perry project? Brad Whitford was in the band then, right? Yeah.
Stayed with us from the first gig, and we did probably a dozen dates with Brad in the lineup. So it was a 2-guitar lineup. It was the Aerosmith, Joe and Brad on guitar fronting, and then we had Ronnie Stewart, who was the original drummer, had been on the first 2 Joe Perry project albums,
right? And
then the brand new bass player Danny Hargrove, who joined the day before me. So it was a 5-man band at that point.
And so you guys went out on the road in 1982. 1982 is the year that you officially joined the Joe Perry project, and then you played like all the time, right? You were gigging all the time. Then you try to get a record contract. Joe Perry had previously, I should say, been on Sony Columbia, and then he got dropped after the I Got the Rock and Rolls Again record, and so you guys were shopping for a new record label, and you went through. Why don't you tell our audience what was the process like for shopping the record?
Yeah, well, it was a total rebuild because along with losing Columbia, he also lost his manager, Don Law, who was a big heavyweight music promoter here in Boston, and he lost his band with Charlie. So he was regrouping totally, a band, a new management, looking for a new label. And after that first dozen dates that we did, Brad left. This scared me because when I joined, with all these different pressures going on around Joe, he was in pretty tough shape. I mean, physically, when I showed up to audition, he was shaking. His color wasn't right. He was mumbling. He couldn't make eye contact. He didn't seem to be able to, he was incoherent to a degree. He was playing pretty well, but Brad was playing Rock of Gibraltar solid. And so that was a relief that we had Brad. And I was nervous when Brad gave his notice and said, I'm not going to be able to head out, because we were about to go across country and do our first major tour. Up until then, Tim had us out doing like long weekends, just getting the band rolling, getting it together, warming up for that big first coast to coast trip. And that's when Brad left. And I was like, oh boy, is Joe really going to be up for this right now?
And how was that first gig with just Joe as a guitarist?
Well, it got progressively shakier. It was hard for all of us. I was still, trying to figure out my place in the band. It was only at that point that Joe moved me into the center of the stage. I'd been singing off on the side of the stage on those first dates with Brad and Joe, center stage in the spotlight. He moved me into the center, but I was still figuring out what I was doing, because it wasn't like I had an album to come out and sing and sound like the guy on the album. I was singing Steven Tyler songs, Charlie songs, Ralph songs. I didn't sound like any of those guys. Joe didn't exactly sound like Joe Perry at that point either. He was not in really his fighting shape. And so it was a pretty rickety thing. Our rhythm section, Ronnie and Danny, were fantastic and really pushed us through. Joe and I think we looked pretty good up on stage. Joe was really skinny at that point. I don't think he was eating at all. And we kind of did we were figuring out how to work together on stage, and that was good. But we only made 6 dates, and then Joe, whatever was going on in his system, he had some sort of a imbalance, and he passed out on the way to the gig, or worse than passed out. He had a seizure in the band. It's a pretty dramatic part of my book. And then what are we going to do? We're out on the road down in North Carolina with no money. We've got to play the gig to get our guarantee so we can make it to the next stop. And Joe now seems okay. So we go and we do the gig, and we make it 4 songs in, and then Joe had a seizure in front of 1,000 people in the audience.
Wow. That's got to be scary when you're on stage and that happens to one of your bandmates. I mean, what do you do in that situation, or what did you do?
Well, we were scared for Joe.
Right.
We were upset. I just been waltzing through the streets of Boston. Farewell to everybody. I'm off on my, national tour, being a big shot. Now here I am with my tail tucked between my legs, running back to Boston. And we didn't know what was going to happen next. Joe wasn't in shape to play. We didn't know what would happen. As it turned out, Tim, our manager, had a great place to put Joe to dry out, get away from the pressure at home, get away from his wife, Alyssa. And it was during this time that it was really decided that they had to split. They weren't healthy for each other at that point. And when Joe came back out, he was clear-headed for the first time. And, he spoke to me, he looked at me in the eye. And as we'll talk about when we talk about the music, we'd already created a fair amount of music at that point together. But I think this was the first time that Joe realized that that's what we were doing, and we were on the road to doing more of it. And he became more engaged with me as we moved forward. creating the songs that would eventually be the Once a Rocker album.
Right, right. Okay. And for everyone watching this, of course, if you want to hear more of Cowboy Mach's great stories, the book "Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker: A Tour Diary" is a must-have, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. Mach, how can they purchase it? If anyone wants to purchase your book, how can they go about buying it?
I'd be happy to send a autographed copy out to anybody, and I'll personalize it to you. Go to oncearocker.com, and that's my website. And right up near the top of the page tells how to get an autographed book. And also Amazon, Barnes and Noble, online. Google Cowboy Mach Bell or Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, and you'll find I'm in all the online bookstores, but I'm not in the regular bookstores. It's online.
So probably the best place would be to your website, oncearocker.com.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, everyone go out there and make sure you buy this amazing book. And now we're going to get started with going track by track of the 1983 Joe Perry Project release. Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, right over there. There it is. Is that the original one that you owned?
No, this is actually a Japanese. I pulled the obi off of it.
Oh wow! Right.
This is a Japanese version of it, but yeah, no, I don't have any of the first editions of anything I ever owned, because moving from apartment to apartment, and I'll have, whatever, my niece or cousin comes, I don't have your album, and here, take this one. Now that was my
right.
So
has there ever been any talk about like reissuing that record domestically? I know that there's been a few reissues like as imports, but anything domestic ever talked about?
Yeah, last time, no, not that I know of. Yeah, it had a 25th anniversary release in Japan, and it released recently in the Netherlands again. But yeah, here, yeah, they're all hot for it over in Russia, but here in the United States, it's it doesn't.
Yeah, well, there definitely is a market for it. I mean, I just looked today, and you can buy the original vinyl pressing for $50 on Amazon. That's that's quite a bit for a record that was like $6.99 when it first came out. And it's a great record. I mean, it's a very underrated record. At the time when it came out, it did well, but I don't know. I really always felt that it was very underappreciated. It was I felt that Joe's playing was probably the best he's played in years. I felt that at the end of Aerosmith, Joe Perry was getting pretty sloppy, and like you mentioned before, like his performances were not up to par. And I think that for this record, I think like you said, he kind of like got his head on straight, and you could definitely tell in his playing. I mentioned in our last interview that I watched you guys perform in 1983 in Buffalo, and that I thought Joe had a lot of energy, which if anybody that watches the Aerosmith videos from like 78, 79, he's very lethargic on stage. And he wasn't like that when I saw him, at least in 1983 with the Joe Perry Project when you were fronting the band.
Yeah, he was a thunderbolt. After that, after that first few months I was with him, that ended in that dry out period, he just got stronger and stronger, and we never missed a date. And yeah, he was playing and singing and jumping around that stage like we had never seen Joe like that before. I'd been following him since all through the 70s too, and it was a whole new Joe.
Yeah, you guys absolutely killed it. Okay, so let's start with the Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker. The first track on the record was Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, and originally that was not going to be the title of the record or of that particular song, correct? There was actually a different title for that song.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, Joe. It is kind of funny in the book where we record it, and then I go back and I see the engineer writing "No Time for Women" on this tape, and I'm like, what is "No Time for Women"? What's that? So that's the song you guys just recorded. I said, no, it's not. I was once a rocker, always a rocker. Joe just told me it's "No Time for Women." When I first went into the audition with Joe, there was, I guess, three things in my mind. I wanted to nail the audition and be in the band. This was an incredible opportunity. I wanted to prove myself as quick as I could, and I knew a thing that would be really cool would be if I could prove that I could write with Joe. And there's a third thing that will come to me. But what was going on from the minute I walked into the rehearsal, he is jamming that Once a Rocker riff that opens the album.
Right. It's a great riff.
And he was over and over again with Brad. They were kicking it back and forth, and he cleaning it up, playing around with it. So, and it was such a strong riff that it embedded in my mind, and I knew it. And I said, I can write a lyric to this. I was already thinking about it before we even did the audition. So that's indeed what I did. I started to write out lyrics, and they came pretty quick. A verse, and I will say I was inspired somewhat by Joan Jett, who had broken through with this #1 song, "I Love Rock and Roll," which wasn't just #1 on the album AOR charts on FM radio. It was #1 on the Billboard Top 100.
Yeah.
And stayed #1 for about 8 weeks. The whole time when I started with Joe, that song was #1 in the United States. And, there were not too many rock songs breaking through at that point, back in '82. That was the days of Prince and not Prince yet. It was the Cars and the Police and
Fix, which you mentioned in the book. The Fix.
The Fix. Yeah, well, they were yet to come. They came
okay.
and released the album. But yeah, that kind of music.
Right.
You weren't hearing a thing like "I Love Rock and Roll." Anyway, so I was thinking once a rocker, always a rocker, was my kind of spin on that idea. So I brought that in to the rehearsal on my second day when I got called back, and I knew Joe would start jamming on that tune again. He kept on going back to it, and he did. And Brad was playing it, and then I just grabbed that mic and started singing the verse. And when we got through the first verse, and Joe kind of looked up through his bangs at me as well as he could look up, and then I sang the "Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, Can You Feel the Beat? Now You're Going to Feel the Heat" bit. And as soon as he heard that, he just boom right back with the chords that would go along with that melody. And then he vamped right into little middle 8 there, where he plays. It's a Once a Rocker. It's a rock song, but it's a funk tune. Really, it's got
yeah, it definitely is. Yeah,
it's a good dance tune.
Right, and that's why I like this record, because the diversity of it. I mean, you hear it's not just a straight ahead, like in your face rocking record. I mean, there's a lot of musical like influences and musical taste in the included in the record, which I really appreciate and like a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah, we mixed up the rhythmic feel of it and the textures of the instrumentation. But on that song, "Once a Rocker," Joe was playing that. I think his main axes, he had the original Telerat, which was a upside down Telecaster neck screwed into an upside down Stratocaster body. It was sanded down on the front, so it was just just plain wood front. So he had this upside down Telerat. He had, after like around 1987, 88, he continued to use Telerat with Aerosmith, but it wasn't the original Telerat that he started out with.
Oh, okay. Wow.
That was, and it was Fender, but he always was using Bill Lawrence pickups. So he had that loaded up with Bill Lawrence, and he also had a Tele that also with Bill Lawrence pickups had regular Telecaster on the bridge and a humbucker on the neck. Those two guitars, I think, were the ones that he would always play that tune on, and that's what he recorded it in the studio over a year later when we finally brought Once a Rocker to the studio. But that's the story on Once a Rocker. So that was the first Perry Bell song that we.
Wow, what a great song! Like right out of the gate, like that. Holy cow!
I know, and it ended up being the name of the album, and it ended up being the name of my book, and it just. But you know how that sometimes that's how it is. You know,
Yeah.
He obviously had been working on that riff for a long time, and I so much wanted to prove myself and was really ready to play my A game out of the box, and so I just hit a home run on that. You know.
Right. I mean, what kind of feeling was that once that song was completed? I mean, did you kind of feel like, yeah, I got one, I got a good one here?
Yeah, well, I was psyched to do it with Joe, and then when we were playing it, and I could see the light dawning on Joe that, hey, we just wrote a song, and I'm just bringing this guy back for a second time to make sure that I think he's okay for the band, and we're already writing.
Yeah.
So this was good.
No, yeah, right.
The other thing that was, but what happened next on the next? Can I move to the next
Yeah,
song?
go ahead. Yeah, the next song is Black Velvet Pants, which was actually the first single from the record, the first officially released single. Yeah.
That was the two peas in a pod, because that was the other song that Joe was playing when I first walked into the rehearsal hall, was that Black Velvet Pants, which was a whole different kind of also a rock song, but a little bit more ahead. I don't know, kind of a twangy, kind of a country-ish.
Yeah, for sure. Country. Yeah, I hear that in there.
And I think he was playing it on he had a Stratocaster as well, not the upside down Telerat, but he had a black Strat with a white pick guard. He ended up playing Black Velvet Pants usually on this Travis Bean guitar that we used, which has a steel neck, so it had a really bright sound. Excuse me. The deal with Black Velvet Pants, though, was after I did Once a Rocker, and I'd been thinking about Black Velvet Pants. That was going to be number 2 because Joe had been playing that.
Yeah.
After we did Once a Rocker and we rehearsed that day, Joe handed me a little blue notebook and he said, "Cowboy, see if there's anything in here." So this was good. He's giving me the notebook, so I knew that I was going to be coming back and seeing him again. So
Right.
I'd be coming back. That's good. And that night I go through the book and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm hoping to find something, and I found it. I love the way they look. I love the way they feel. And then that's connected to virtually the whole song as I sang it on the record is
Right.
out. And I said, this will fit with what Joe's playing. Joe doesn't even remember this thing. I doubt it. This book he gave me went all the way back to Aerosmith days. You know, it had like the original lyrics to Bright Light Fright in it. And
Oh,
it
wow.
had a lot of Aerosmith stuff in it. But then it also, halfway through the book, it turned into Joe Perry Project and all these lists of song titles and ideas. Anyway, I find this piece. I thought it would be really important to Joe at this point that if I could come back, when he started playing that riff and I started singing the song, it clicked immediately. The whole band got into it. We played, Black Velvet Pants came together in a matter of minutes. And then when I told Joe, that's yours, man. Those are your lyrics. He knew the riff was his.
Yeah.
And I told him the lyrics. I felt that he needed that at that point because he was a guy who he looked like he couldn't even, tie his shoes at that point, let alone write a kick-ass song.
Yeah.
And it was, that's what it was, man. It was it was important to Joe. It was important to me, and we were off and running. And even though my name's not on that one, I was just kind of an arranger putting it together. But it meant as much to me as any song I ever wrote with Joe to be able to do that.
Yeah. Were you surprised that the record company decided to release that as the first single instead of Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, which I think that would obviously should have been the first single from the record.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of, I don't know how that decision happened. I mean, we went ahead and on our end, we did a music video for Black Velvet Pants. I don't know
Right.
if because there was never actually like a 45 single ever released on Black Velvet. It was released to MTV as a video. I do know that when radio stations started playing it, we did distribute a special tape cartridge with Black Velvet Pants with a run out at the end with a fade, a proper fade,
Mm-hmm.
which we do in the video because if you remember on the album, it has a hard chop.
Yeah, it's right. It ends like immediately. Yeah.
Which wasn't greeted by the radio that well because DJs don't want to have that kind of a surprise.
Right.
Don't want
Yeah, exactly. I can imagine like they're waiting for that. And all of a sudden, oh, we got to be going on the air right now. Yeah. Okay. So the next song is "Women in Chains," and that song you had outside writers with that. There was Ronnie Brooks, Harold Tipton, and Tom DeLuca were the writers for that song. So what was the story behind that, and why bringing the song and bringing outside writers?
Yeah, it wasn't because we didn't have our own music. It was, I think, the label MCA were the label that finally picked us up, and we did the album for we recorded in July of 1983. That was a very rocky road. It was hard getting the deal, and then once we got the deal, they changed record label presidents. Irving Azoff came in, and the first thing he did was drop Joe Perry Project.
Right.
It was the first thing he did when he, and that was like on the eve of us going in, beginning the record. So, I mean, that was a punch in the gut and very upsetting after spending that long to land this deal and then to get dropped before you've even played the first note.
Yeah.
So, so I guess it's to rewind back because that's where we were at. That's how tenuous it was with MCA. So let's go back 4 weeks when Leon Tillis, or he has a T at the beginning of the name, but I think it's pronounced Sillis. I could never get it straight if it's Leon Sillis or Leon Tillis. Anyway,
well, if he's watching, I'm sure you can comment on it and get set us straight, right?
He was a big A&R guy for the label. He was in Nashville, and he was going to fly up and meet with Joe. We were thrilled just to have connection with the label and that they would do something, with us. So Joe was all ears, met with Leon. I didn't meet him, but they had a nice time. And in that meeting, Leon said, I've got this song that I think could be a hit, and it's for you guys. And it was written by those guys, Brooks, Tipton, DeLuca.
Mm-hmm.
It actually sounded like the Police. It was a very nicely produced demo, and the singer on it, which was probably one of those three guys, had a killer Sting kind of voice, which was nothing like what we did, and the whole presentation of it kind of sounded like a Police song, which made sense because that was the band that was
big. Yeah, they were huge back then.
So anyway, so we have that song, and Joe listened to it, and he said, I could do something with this, and I could pull out my lap steel guitar, which he had. I think a Rickenbacker of all people made a lap steel that he had, and use my Travis Bean and a few of my other guitars. And Joe put together this guitar treatment of the song and played it for us. And I said, well, I sure as hell I'm not going to be able to do a Sting vocal, but maybe I could sing it like Alice Cooper, kind of. I don't know. Anyway, so it came together. Those same songwriters wrote a song for Molly Hatchet. I'm not a huge Hatchet guy, but a song called "Stone in Your Heart" by Molly.
Right.
It was by that same team of
Oh,
writers.
really? Okay.
Um,
Not one of their hits.
not one of the big radio hits, but
Yeah, that's cool.
they did. Yeah, they have a couple songs that made it onto different albums. I'm sure they were really surprised to hear what we did with their Women in Chains.
I think it's a great song. It's a really good song. You guys rocked out with it. Yeah.
Good. You know, like so many things about our album, it was just so different from what Joe had been doing in the previous two
For
albums.
sure. Yeah.
You know, I think people were shocked to see what we looked like on the record, Joe and the rest of us. That kind of like was nothing like the first two records. And
Mm-mm.
then to hear every song be like with a total different rhythm and doing us, you know, this Women in Chains. I think we got a pretty raw reception from a lot of critics who just, I don't think they really gave Once a Rocker the chance that it
Oh, I
probably.
agree. I agree 100%. Yeah. Even at the time, I thought, hey, why aren't more of these songs being played on the radio? Why aren't they selling more records? I mean, at the time, I was a huge fan of the Joe Perry Project and of that particular lineup. I felt that, I thought it was more of a band than before. You were more of a front man than the other singers. This was the first record that came out, the first Joe Perry Project record that came out that featured exclusively all vocals from one person, and that was you. The prior two records had Joe singing on some tracks. So this was the first Joe Perry Project record that had all vocals by the vocalist.
A real trust grew between Joe and the band, and we'd been out there so long working together and creating this music, as you saw in Buffalo. That was the other thing. A lot of these people that gave the band no respect just said, "What's with this album?" Joe just came out suddenly with this album out of the blue with a bunch of guys he just picked up off the street. Maybe they're studio musicians or and threw this thing together. And that just was not the case at all. We had actually been out, um, you know, on the road longer than anything else that Joe had been doing outside of Aerosmith. And we've been doing more on the road than Aerosmith had been doing for a while.
Yeah,
We were really a hardworking band, um, which brings us to Four Guns West, the next song. Actually,
another great song. Yes, yes.
it's written, you know, that song was written on the road, starting in the summer of 1982. You know, I specifically talk about our travels in that van in Cincinnati when the crew went out and got into a big fight, ended up,
Yep.
somebody got cut pretty bad, and there was a trail of blood back to our hotel, which led the Cincinnati police force right back to
Jeez.
Project was staying. And it was quite easy to track the trail back to the elevator, and then check each floor until you found where the trail continued on to the room. That story is in Four Guns West, and then our trip in that was actually, I guess, early '83 Cincinnati, and '82 summer. I talk about Austin, Texas, and I think San Antonio. There's a lot of cities and a lot of different
Yeah, yeah.
situations that you know, I could pick it word by word, except I'm not going to do that right now. But that was a diary within a diary of and the Four Guns being us. We're the Four Guns.
Hmm.
Four Guns West. Seemed we were always heading west on the Mass Pike, out to you guys in New York and beyond. You know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A great rocking song. Song number 5, Crossfire.
Yeah, Crossfire really came together in a little tiny room, which was in Joe Pett's upstairs apartment in the suburbs of Boston. As we progressed and became more of a road band, we couldn't afford to pay for a rehearsal hall back home because we weren't in it enough to make it worth it. I think also maybe bills weren't paid or whatever, because the red carpet wasn't really out for us to come back to some of these rehearsal places. We'd started out in this really nice rehearsal annex building behind the Cambridge Music Complex, which was sweet. That's where Once a Rocker and Black Velvet Pants were written. By the time we got to Four Guns West, we had no rehearsal hall. We figured it out on the road. And by the time we got to Crossfire, the last song on that side, now that one we wrote specifically for the record. And it was up in that Joe Pett, our drummer's little drum studio, very small room, about the size of the room that I'm in right now talking to you, with drums and small practice amps and me jumping around. And Joe just had this, he suddenly had that really staccato, really jumping guitar riff. And then Pett, who was, he could lay it down on like a Four Guns West, like an AC/DC style, but he's also, he's got a lot of percussion experience, and he's got a lot of percussion, including like timbales, which are these like Spanish type drums. And he had set up this wood block, and he got this counter rhythm going to what Joe was playing on the guitar. And so if you hear Crossfire, when it opens up, it's just this wild guitar drum interplay, and it's different from anything that I've heard on a rock record anywhere. And it just had some nice wide open spaces where I could write lyrics. And the lyric is no great shakes. It's kind of me bragging and being a rock and roll guy. And,
right. A good old rocker. Yeah.
And, look out for us, here we come.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah.
A big dumb rock song from what I did, but what the other guys brought to it was great. And it features two saxophone players, Jim and Rick Cunningham, who were brought into the studio and really let it rip at the end, kind of Rolling Stones style. And Joe loves to play. He always tells me when he's playing his guitar parts, he likes to think of horn parts. He likes that Sam and Dave and Blues Brothers and that horn part, da, 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 ba, 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 kind of thing. And he likes to do that on his guitar. And so he was really cooking. And we used those same guys I should have mentioned at the end of
Black Velvet Pants too, right? Yeah. There was a lot of horns or sax on that song, right?
And another reason why, people hearing the record for the first time are going, what the hell is this? This is not a Joe Perry Project album. What's the saxophone doing here? It was Joe's first time producing, and he wanted to do some things that he heard in his head and experiment and get it out there, and it rocked,
Yeah. I also think it's possibly one of those records that, you kind of have to grow into. I mean, not me necessarily, but maybe some of the older Aerosmith fans are used to Aerosmith and wanted that. It took them a while to maybe a couple listens maybe before they actually really start appreciating what a great record it really is. And like I said, what a musically diverse record it is.
Thanks. Yeah,
yes.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, no problem. And then we have song number 6, Adriana, which also had a different title. Which was When Do I Sleep? Was that the original title of that, or the?
Yeah, When Do I Sleep? Right. It was a different title, and the whole lyric was a whole different lyric as well. Another autobiographical, I can't say it, tune. We went to Caracas, South America, down to Venezuela, soon after Joe came out of that rehab. Middle of 1982. I'd been in the band about 6 months. We got shipped down there to be the headliner in this 20,000 seat arena that we played 2 nights in a row and sold out both nights. It was just absolutely from outer space.
Wow.
Adriana was in charge of the hospitality, which besides food and drink was also a copious amount of cocaine that was flowing in straight from Peru. So I wrote this song, When Do I Sleep? Because we were down there for 5 days, two shows, but we were down there for a couple days doing promotion and then a couple days recovery before we came back to the States. There was no time to sleep. We were doing radio shows. We were being squired around town. We each had our own limousine.
Wow.
We were in the nicest hotel. We each had a big suite, and we're doing the gigs, and all these drugs were keeping everybody awake all night. So the original song was more about that experience that I just told you, with talking about driving. The Mercedes dealers were the promoters, so we were each had a Mercedes.
Wow.
And it was about the Mercedes and about the partying, and it was a little bit more sex and drugs related, kind of like a Bon Scott type of lyric. So, and then we did that, and we played that live on the road through 82. We recorded a demo as I described it with Ron Stewart, our drummer, the original drummer,
Right.
laying down this huge bashing beat. By the time we brought the song almost 7-8 months later to the studio to record for the album, we had a different drummer. Joe had refined his guitar part, and once the basics were laid down, I heard a whole different song. And and he had those horns too. So I did it more as a dance song, Adriana, When Do You Sleep? Because when the guitar starts, I'm up on my feet, or something along those lines. And it actually got picked up by a couple of stations, so thought that should have been the hit.
Yeah.
I mentioned in the book, I didn't realize until after the record was out and everything, the song has a disco beat underneath it.
It does. It does have kind of like disco was kind of dying down at that time, and you guys still used it anyways, and it works. It definitely works in there.
Unless Joe was hiding on me, I don't think he ever thought of it as being a damn disco song. It just had that kind of a Miss You, Stones, it had that kind of disco thing underneath it. And so, yeah, some of these stations were playing it like it was going to be a club hit. Anyway, so that was the opening, Adriana. And she's still, the only mistake I made was when I wrote her name in my lyric, I put 2 N's in Adriana, and I didn't realize she only has 1 N. But so on the Adriana with 2 N's, but
she probably changed her name so
No.
she could say that song was about me.
I guarantee she's watching this interview from down in wherever she is in Brazil now. She still tunes into any cowboy activities. She's
that's great.
Project fan.
That is awesome. Well, good for her.
Yeah, hey Adriana. Yeah, she's great.
Excellent. Song number 7, King of the Kings. That is a song that, when you listen to this record and when you're trying to sleep at night, the song keeps going through your head. It is so catchy. It's a great song.
Thank you. Yeah, that song, I think on the Canadian, at least the Canadian cassette versions, they switched King of the Kings onto the first side of the record.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, I think they switched it with Four Guns West. Anyway, King of the Kings. Yeah, that's another like Crossfire that came together late in the process, up in that little mini room with Joe Pett. Joe Perry started playing this big riff, and oh man, we dove in on that because it's so heavy and great.
It is.
And to me, it tasted a little bit like an Aerosmith song, and so I kind of did a little bit of Cowboy Aerosmith treatment on it as much as I could. I can't really write like Steve, and nobody can, but I don't know. I was kind of thinking that because I was figuring people who buy a Joe Perry album, are going to want to hear a little taste of Aerosmith. And so I was thinking that a little bit. I don't believe we ever played it live on stage until after we had recorded it. And it was during the recording that Joe pulled out that 6-string Fender bass, the one that he played the huge riff on that opens Back in the Saddle.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And that lead guitar break is actually a lead bass break that happens. That's why it has that ripping sound when that bass comes in. He plays it up on the neck, so you wouldn't even know it was a bass guitar. Also, he's using the Leslie speakers that he brought into the studio. Leslie's are the big boxes that are usually next to a B3 Hammond organ. Has a rotating speaker, actual speaker mounted on a propeller that spins around and gives a very warbling sound. He used it on Women in Chains, I believe, and King of the Kings. Killer tune.
Great song. Yes, absolutely. One of my favorites from the record.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody ever played it on the radio. It's deep enough in the record, nobody really knew about it. So
yeah, that's the one thing about like records. I mean, sometimes you just like preferred one side over another, and you would just play that one side and like kind of forget about side two. And that's definitely like a hidden gem on that record. Song number 8 is a T-Rex cover of "Bang a Gong," and that's "Bang a Gong" is one of my favorite tracks of all time. And when I heard that song, I was never really a big fan of cover songs, but I really love the way that you guys play that. And to this day, I mean, I prefer that one over the original. I know I'll get a lot of flack for that, but I really like the way you guys just rock it out.
Yeah, Joe's production on it is pretty amazing. He really layered on the guitars, and there's a lot. On headphones, that song is a trip. It's a much more evolved than the straight ahead Mark Bolan T-Rex version, although I wouldn't say anything bad about that. That was
Right. Well, that's a classic too, of course. Yes.
definitely. Bang a Gong came together at the A Warehouse. Aerosmith's famous rehearsal hall became available to us for a short time early in 1983. We hadn't rehearsed anywhere for a long time because we couldn't scratch up a place to rehearse or the money to rent a place to rehearse, and we were usually on the road anyway. The Warehouse was where Aerosmith had, put together a lot of those mid 70s, rocks and Toys in the Attic, and recorded some parts of them, I believe, in the Warehouse too.
I think they even recorded a couple, or at least one track from the bootleg record. I think was recorded there. I believe. Yeah.
Okay, you're probably more right on than I am. I had a big fish dinner with Ginger, and I'm a little lightheaded. I can't guarantee. Anyway, we got to get into this Warehouse, and we'd been listening to the rock songs that were making it into the top 40, and we were, Van Halen were the biggest rock band in 1982, 83, and they had got "Oh Pretty Woman," the Roy Orbison tune they'd redone, and then they had "Dancing in the Streets," which Martha and the Vandellas or something. They did a version on that. So they were doing covers.
Yeah.
So Joe said, "Okay, let's do Chain of Fools," the Aretha Franklin tune. And he's a soul man, so he had this soulful. That song only has one chord, "Chain of Fools."
Really?
Around a C chord with the low E tuned down to a low C. Anyway, so he's playing Chain. I don't know. I wasn't feeling it that day. I couldn't sing like Aretha. We knocked around a couple other tunes, and then we started messing with "Bang a Gong," and it was a good fit for the band. We immediately took it out on the road and played it for the next few months on the road. And the thing about it, Thomas, So we did it and recorded it, and Joe does this amazing production on it. We thought that the song was due to be a hit again, and hey, it could be our way to get on the radio. It was less than a year later that I heard Bang a Gong on the radio, and I hadn't heard it on the radio since the old 70s, early 70s with T-Rex, and it was Power Station,
Power Station, that Duran, right? Yeah.
I think Robert
Palmer
singing the lead. Yeah. There it is, Bang a Gong. And they didn't do anything particularly fantastic with it any more than we did. It was just a cool song, and they rocked it. And sure enough, it was the right time for the song. MCA, I don't think they were aware that it meant nothing, and nobody picked up on it. So
wow, yeah, I forgot that song, that Power Station song, came out right around that time too. Wow, yeah, that kind of sucks, huh? Oh man, you had the right idea.
Kind of sucks. I mean, it would be, if that hadn't happened, I'd be like, what were we thinking? Who was going? T-Rex already had a hit. That was, but no, it was ready to hit.
Yeah, you were right. You were right. Number 9 is "Walk with Me, Sally," which is just a straight out rockin', like good old like Saturday night at the bar drinking beers until like 4 a.m. song.
Yeah, right. And it sounds so much like an old standard because it's built around a 1-4-5 progression, like a Tutti Frutti or a Wop Bop Loop Bop kind of song that a lot of people thought it was a cover. We played a gig at the Bottom Line, and the reviewer in Billboard said best song was their cover of "Walk with Me, Sally." And hey, that's an original tune. That song was part of Joe's rehab. It all started at Joe's Aerosmith mansion in Newton. I went to visit him there, and he told me he'd had a dream, and the dream was "Walk with Me, Sally." Wow. So I said, "Walk with me, Sally." Okay. And I wrote it down on a piece of paper, stuck it in my pocket. So then I had that in my back pocket for a while. And then while Joe was in rehab, I started putting together words, and it, telephone is ringing, someone pounding on the door. I was thinking about Joe in his life at that point. The telephone is ringing. It's the bill collector. Somebody's pounding on the door. It's somebody repossessing his house. And then he packs up his guitar in his case, and he's heading out the back. And then he meets her face to face. I was kind of getting into where Joe is at a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, there's a funny thing about that song. So then we brought it out and rehearsed it, and then brought it out on the road and played it. I think we premiered it that summer, July 4th of 82, when we were on a bill with Joan Jett. And then we played it all the time. And a lot of time we used it as an encore song because it was just a barn burner. When we were recording the song, nobody knows about this. When we were recording the song, the big headline news in the United States was that the first female astronaut was going up. Or I might be wrong with my scientific details, but the big deal was this woman named Sally Ride was going to go off into space. So Joe Pett, our drummer, never listened to the drummer. The drummer comes up to me and says, "Cowboy, this is our chance. Sally Ride is the biggest thing in the United States right now. Everybody's talking about Sally. So when you go in and sing 'Walk with Me, Sally,' say something about her in the song, and then it will become like, when they do the story from NASA, they'll be playing our song in the back. It will be, become a." So if you actually listen carefully to the last verse in the song, I'm heading out the back and she's heading into space. I actually say, I changed the lyric from I'm heading out the back and I meet her face to face. It's something along the lines of, I'm heading out the back and she's heading into space. Take a walk with me, Sally. So
wow.
Very small mention of outer space, but that was Joe Pett's idea, and it was a stupid idea. As far as
No, actually, well, I think it's a great idea. Yeah. I mean, it
next time,
was the topic at the time, so yeah, I dig that. That's cool.
next time you listen to it, I think it happens to like the very last bit that I sing.
Well, every time I do listen to it now, that's what I'm going to think of. I mean, how could I not? Okay, so the last track on the record was "Never Want to Stop." Another great song. Obviously, some song had to be the last song on the record. Tell us about that, and why was it put as the last song on the record?
Well, Once a Rocker, the last lyric in that is "Welcome to the show," and it was it started my career with Joe, and so that was a good opener. And then I think I was looking for a closer idea, and "Never Want to Stop" seemed like a good way to go out. Like, it's got to end, but we don't want it to end.
Right. Okay.
I originally wrote the lyrics thinking about Led Zeppelin. I was thinking about the what was it, Hangman, the Gallows
Mm-hmm.
song, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly how that all goes, but it had a cadence to it that keep me from the gallows pole. And so I wrote lyrics sitting in my room, not knowing what I was ever going to do, if anything, with those lyrics, just thinking about that rhythm. That's the way when you're writing and you don't have a band with you, you just like think of a rhythm, dunk
Mm-hmm.
dunk 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 dunk, or whatever it is, and kind of just write a lyric to the rhythm. Um, so yeah, and I guess I don't know if we talked about it or we just knew. The other guitar that Joe always had with him was that Dan Armstrong that he played "Draw the Line" with Aerosmith and played "Let the Music Do the Talking" at the end of every Joe Perry Project show. Of course, we want to bring out that Dan Armstrong and do some Wild Bottleneck. So I can't remember whether Joe brought out the Bottleneck first. Now we're back in Pet's little room, cramped in there. I can't remember if Joe brought out the Bottleneck and started playing, sliding around, and I started jamming on those lyrics, or whether I started jamming on the lyrics, just scatting, like rapping, and Joe grabbed the slide guitar and started playing under it. But like so many of our things, it just was a let the music do the talking kind of operation, where he'd start or I'd start, and it would just happen. There was no discussion of, hey, you know what we really need, blah blah blah, let's do something
Yeah.
in key, or no talk. Action. We were the action boys. So that's where it all it happened. And it's just I think he's got that Leslie spinning guitar amp feature in that one as well. He's got the great Bottleneck, and then at the end of the tune, Joe goes up to the mic and he does this bit about a change of address will fool the IRS and they'll never take me alive, and then buried it way down in the mix, so kids would have to listen on their headphones and try to decipher what Joe's secret message at the end
Wow.
was. It was a really awesome way to end the record, I thought.
Yeah. And that's Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, the 10 tracks. But there were some tracks that did not make the record. I want to discuss those a bit. There was another cover song, the Eddie Cochran song called "Something Else," which you guys actually performed at some of the shows. I know the Buffalo show that I saw in October of 1983. You guys not only played it during the show, but it was also the song that you did during your sound check.
Yeah, it was a warm up go to tune for us. We loved to play it. It was a good one for a sound check. We could play it, right out of the box, and it was cool for a sound check because Joe and I both sing on it. It was quick, it was compact, and it just, and we used it usually as a second or third song in our live set, because it just always did damage to the place. People loved it.
Yeah.
And we brought it to the studio, and that one actually made it all the way to the MCA sessions, and we did record basic tracks for the tune, but it never went further than that basic tracks.
Hmm.
Um, I think once we got to that, I think that I believe is the only one that we did a basic track on that did not get used on the album, because once you made it that far, there were a whole bunch of songs that almost made it that far, but didn't quite make it to the studio, to that studio. We were in another studio before we came to the actual final making the record studio. Yeah, I guess Joe, as producer, had to then listen to the 11 tracks we had cut and say, okay, one of these has to go. Because this is back in the day of the vinyl album, and you were only allowed whatever, 18 and a half, 19 minutes per side.
Yeah.
And so we had an extra tune there.
Yeah, the full record tracks, and I think right under 40 minutes. I think it's like 39 minutes long for the full record. Yeah, and there were some other tracks too. Let's see. And you talk of course, you mentioned a couple of these in your book as well. They'll Never Take Me Alive. What was
Great Joe Perry guitar part on that. Really atmospheric, spooky. He was tremendous. And what he did, we were in a project studio before we went to do the final. And wow, the way that sounded in the studio, it was kind of, that was also put together kind of for the record. I guess part of it was we just weren't invested in the song enough yet. We hadn't done it out on the road, and we didn't even know what it was. I think when I listen to it back now, They'll Never Take Me Alive, I say, wow, that would have been an awesome one to put on. But then it's like, so what are you going to do? Take off King of the Kings and do that?
right?
Do you get rid of Bang a Gong and put, and then you've got to make decisions on, somebody had to go because of that time constraint we had on the vinyl records.
Right.
But there was that one. And then there was the incredible When Worlds Collide, which we had demoed out 2 different times and played all over the place, and people loved it. And then all of a sudden it vanished and didn't get used. And we'd been also talking about a song that Joe had written, First Ones for Free, that I believe he had written probably in the Charlie Farron era of the project, and it didn't make it onto that album. And so that was going to be the one that Joe sang on this album.
Oh, okay.
There was that. And then there was
Going Down was one of them, right?
Going Down, we also did as a demo. That one, I don't think we ever seriously were considering putting it on the album. We just needed to show what the band sounded like. We did that on our first demo when Brad was in the band, and it sounded awesome. It showed, the power of the project.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, I don't think that one was ever destined to make it to the record. But those songs that we're talking about, as far as I was concerned, it wasn't like, okay, we're not going to do They'll Never Take Me Alive, so into the ash can it goes. It was like, we'll develop these on the road, and then we'll record them, on the next album.
Right.
Or take them apart and pull out good parts and create new songs. Until you lay it down for real, all those songs are just Frankenstein that you can pull the head off and pop it.
Yeah, you hear about that all the time, like, bands like, songwriters taking parts of songs and putting them together. And yeah, it's probably very common.
Right. I mean, that's when you get good, when you understand that, and you don't get so emotionally involved in your song, and, oh no, you can't do that to my baby, my song. You can't rip the leg off of it and put it on something else. But yeah, that's how good songs get born.
Yeah. So that was the Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker record. We did it. We went through every track. And you said that this is the first time that you've actually done this, right? Gone through every single track before.
It is absolutely the first time.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the honor. I really appreciate that.
It was your concept to do it. I thought everybody I told about said they can't wait to watch the episode. I hope that I was clear as possible on my memories. My book, I wrote back when I was in the project 30 years ago, so that's like the real deal. What we just did, I was more working from my memory of the time. Luckily, the old pumpkin still works pretty good, but
Yeah, those are some really good stories and some great details about the songs. I really appreciate. I'm sure a lot of the fans of Aerosmith and the Joe Perry project are going to love watching this and getting your insight on this great, very underrated record. And I would love to see it. There it is again. I love to see a resurgence. I'd love to see MCA re-release that, put some of these demos on it, and do it right and get this record back out there so people can listen to. I mean, it really is a classic, and you must be really proud of the fact that you were such a huge part of this great record.
thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I got to admit, more so now than ever. Uh, it never, uh, it just astonishes me more and more. Being a little footnote in the glorious career of Joe, and yeah, I think I made the best of it of that couple 2.5 years I was with him.